Well, welcome everybody to Office Hours. I'm so glad to have you here, as well as for those that are watching on YouTube. Thank you also for looking into this and learning from what we can share together. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my colleague, Ben Abramson. Ben is a staff writer for Strong Towns, an incredible voice, writing articles for us about community struggles, the challenges that places are facing, but also the ways in which many people are working together to overcome these things. And the theme for today's session is how to hold events or host events in your community that are newsworthy. And I wanted to bring somebody in who had experience on the other side of the news desk. I've been that guy writing ineffectual emails to local media to be like, hey, could you, potentially, possibly take some notice of what I'm doing, and receive no response. So I thought I need to find the wizard or the person that knows how to actually make this happen. And so Ben was a journalist working for the Washington Post as well as for USA Today. He's also worked as an editor and as a work organizer within the media. Ben's also a great storyteller, and I think that will come out in our sessions today. And that storytelling is a skill that he has turned into a very useful talent to be able to capture attention, to be able to drive engagement, as well as to help us to connect with an audience. Ben, part of his work that I'm interested in is that Ben worked on the editorial launch team for WashingtonPost.com when they were just joining the internet in the early days of news media organizations grappling with that transition, and also published one of the first online city guides. And that is an interesting way of then transitioning into today, where there is a lot of noise, a lot of clutter on the internet, and yet when you find ways to break through, there can be some great opportunities. And so, Ben, welcome to Office Hours. I'd love to just have you take a few moments and introduce yourself any further as well. Oh, wait, you're down in Sarasota, Florida, I should add. But Ben, a few thoughts as we start?
Thanks for that nice introduction, Norm. Nice to virtually meet you all. As Norm said, I have had a very rewarding career as a journalist, and I got to the place where I wanted to use my skills for good. And before I was a Strong Towns staff member, I was a Strong Towns member. And when I gave money to Strong Towns, it was because I felt there was a message that they were spreading that I wanted more people to hear. And that was my motivation for becoming a member. And when I saw a listing for a writer, I threw my name in the hat and started last November, and have just been really excited to be a member of the team. This is a really dedicated group across many areas of interest and expertise. But I think you see in everything we do the level of commitment we have to making our towns more resilient, more hospitable, and trying to rectify some of the mistakes we've seen, especially in 20th century planning and development. Let me just start with a little bit of an introduction about journalism and Strong Towns and you. I'm going to start with some bad news. As many of you know, there's a crisis in local journalism in North America. The number of outlets is shrinking. The Gannett, who was the parent company for USA Today, where I used to work, I've read that in the past 3 years, they have shrunk their editorial staff by more than 50%. Many of their publications are running as virtual ghost towns or using regional or wire copy. So especially from a newspaper perspective, it's harder than ever to find local coverage. You used to have a local beat reporter for transportation, for education, for local government. Now you might have one person struggling to cover a lot of issues in your community. One good thing that has happened is people are filling in the blanks. You're seeing citizen-led publications and websites. I read a really fascinating piece about in Asheville, North Carolina, so many former journalists have retired there that they were fed up by the lack of accountability journalism in the local paper, which I have to say is a Gannett paper. And they've started going to meetings. They started poring over public records and are trying to hold some accountability. So there are, when you're looking for who should cover what you're doing, don't just look at the local masthead newspaper, look at the total ecosystem in your community. The other thing, local TV news is still doing okay, and they are always hungry for content. So you will find them more receptive, especially if you have something that's visually compelling. Now with the bad news, I want to give you the good news. The Strong Towns message is really resonant. The idea of dedicated citizens trying to improve their communities is inherently interesting to local journalism. It's what they're there for. So your efforts, if you can get attention to them, will be responded to. The other thing is, because we're nonpartisan and non-judgmental, I consider this our secret sauce. If you're pitching for something from, for instance, the war on cars, you are identifying yourself as against something, and you're going to have a harder time breaking through. Strong towns, we're not anti-growth, we're for smart growth. We're not anti-cars, we're for balancing the nature between the non-motorized users and cars. So we have an opening that I think that many other nonprofits and even people who share our space that we really admire might not have. And I find when I'm writing stories and I reach out to people, our message is very resonant, and I hope that you'll find that as well as you try to pitch your events and stories.
I really appreciate not only in a sense, the picture that outlines what we're dealing with, but also the recognition that there's better possible. And I think it touches on the first question that I want to ask you, Ben, which is for local conversations or for just speaking up about local issues. Maybe if we ask it this way, like why does local coverage matter? Why not try to get CNN to show up or some other, whatever your partisan or news organization happens to be? Why does that local coverage matter? And what have you seen in terms of the benefits that it offers for a place?
So I can give you several examples of that, but the most important is we're all doing the work we do to try to affect change in our communities. In many cases, that's going to go through local elected officials, local professionals, and planning professionals. And so you need to create awareness of your issue, and just as important, a groundswell for why it matters. And I think many of us have seen in our communities, in national politics, that something might not get attention until it gets media attention, and then it becomes harder to ignore. So your goal is to sort of build the snowball to make it to when you go to your city council meeting, you're showing that there is that there's support, that there's resonance and attention to your issues, and that can in turn influence how local officials respond to you. The second one is more related to strong towns and the local conversation itself, which is more publicity gets you more eyeballs, which gets you more participants and readers. And, we've all had a moment where we read about something Strong Towns did that made us say, wow, I never even heard of that. And the more people you reach, again, the bigger your snowball is going to be. And connecting back to the original theme, the bigger your group is, as you know, you've seen like in a city or town council meeting, 500 people with red t-shirts, that's a pretty powerful message. And so the more you can do to rally your group and to increase pressure for your issues, the more successful you're going to be.
I just think of that in terms of that hook and that capacity to always be finding what is the human interest here, what is that that's going to really resonate with someone, as not only, I think probably when you were an editor, you were always asking the question, is this interesting in my audience? And if you can do some of that work ahead of time to be interesting to the editor's like, okay, no, if it's interesting to me, it should make for an interesting story, or it should make for an interesting profile, a desire to try to follow up with that. And sometimes it can be, maybe I'll touch a little bit on my own experiences. I worked in a mayor's office where I would write out press releases, and they were so boring, and I was always amazed that sometimes they would actually end up in news stories. And it wasn't because the press release was any good. It was just because it was coming from a qualified sort of source of information, and then the local paper felt some obligation or some need in order to pass those things along, sometimes even just reprinting most of what I had written in the press release, which is not great journalistic practice, but a consequence of shrinking numbers and all of that. But when you're at a local level, or when you're an upstart, the challenge is that you don't get that incumbency advantage. You have to break in. And so maybe that's a question that I have here is, do you have any guidance to offer in terms of timing or types of information to share or ways to reach out?
I think that's a really important point you raise. And my first piece of advice is really anticipate all the questions you're going to receive and have a good answer for them. And in most cases, again, your issue is going to be there's an unsafe stroad in your neighborhood. People are dying on local streets is inherently interesting to local journalists. And so you want to be able to anticipate the questions and to connect what your sort of granular issue is with a bigger systemic one. And I think, Strong Towns has a lot of resources and guidance to help with this. But that to me is always the micro macro question is really one of the ways you break through. And the more coherent you sound to the person you're interacting with, the more they're going to understand your issue, and the better chance they're going to have when they go pitch to their higher ups. They're going to go to a story conference and they're going to say, this is important because of this. And the more you can help them, spoon feed them as far as you can, the more they're going to be informed and be a better advocate for the story that you want them to tell.
And that can be maybe, can you explain in terms of, from your perspective, what did you see in terms of desire to have an issue covered versus an interest to have an event covered? Because sometimes we use events in order to drive coverage. Do you have any suggestions on that? Because I mean, especially for just a local regular person, sometimes it feels, well, I don't have the tools available to host an event or to get 500 people to show up in a t-shirt. Who's going to even fund the t-shirts and things like that? But even though you're right. It's a great tactic. It's a great tool. But along the way, what is it that we can do to either use events, or is there ways to get issues noticed? And, because it always felt to me like the ideal is to get a sit down with a reporter. And yet that's only happened, well, a couple of times now, only as other pieces have kind of fallen into place. But it often feels like the average person has lots to share with a reporter if they would just get matched up with each other. But that never seems to happen. And maybe, do you have any thoughts on how to make that happen, or maybe that's not the right goal at all?
Well, a couple of points on this. One is that if you're doing an event, it really needs to tie to a broader theme, except maybe in the case of local TV news, which might just be looking for something interesting with 30 seconds of good visuals and local citizens. That is an exception to that. But as a broader rule, your event is really about calling attention to a broader issue, especially in the case of Strong Towns activists, something that you're really trying to affect change with. To the second question of sitting with a reporter, this I think is a really important point. Don't always assume that your reach out to a journalist has to be because you have this life-changing event or story that they need to cover. Think about it more personally. For me as a journalist, sometimes it was just a cup of coffee with somebody who had something interesting to tell me. And that might not always lead to an immediate result, but it plants a seed and it gives awareness. So I would say if there's somebody who you see in your community who's writing about issues that are adjacent to ours, uh, just ask them for a half an hour to buy a cup of coffee and sort of talk to them about what you're doing, what Strong Towns is doing. And again, I come back to this thing of all of us had a moment where Strong Towns said something that made us go, wow, I've never thought of that before. Uh, and I think that, that's really important. And I'll just give you one example. A former colleague was talking to a local group of architects here in Sarasota about they wanted to publicize. I'm actually in Venice, which is south of Sarasota, a charming small town built by John Nolan in the 1920s. You should visit if you ever come here. But she was saying they were lamenting that they couldn't get coverage. And she said, have you ever called the reporter who covers real estate or architecture? And they all scratch their head. So start with some outreach and don't expect too much. Don't be nervous about it. Just say, I'm a citizen in this community. Here are some problems I see, and here are some ways we're trying to get at them.
And Ben, I wish you were with me like about a year and a half ago when I was reaching out to my local reporter and just wanting to talk, but didn't frame it, didn't sort of give an angle in a sense to help them do the work of knowing. For me, it was more, hey, I'd just like to chat. And that wasn't enough. And I've lamented the fact that I had offered to buy him a beer and a burger and that he had still not expressed any interest. But I think if I had followed that advice, that definitely would have helped. But it definitely touches on another point that I had. And for those that are watching, Ben has written a number of articles about local groups and the way that those local groups have come to our attention as Strong Towns and the way that it makes its way through our pitch process is often because there's local media coverage of it, which underscores, I think, the importance of having that local media, even being a local subscriber. If there's a way for you to make that work with your budget, this is maybe a quick little pitch to like love your local media organizations while you still have them, if you still have them, because they are so valuable. Or even some of the little startups that pop up where you might not always agree with their tone or might not agree with, just some thread of what they're doing, but to have them on the beat still really makes a big difference. And I think the vast majority of our communities now no longer have a local beat reporter for City Hall or taking note of what's happening. In fact, I think there was a study that many state capitals are losing their beat reporters at the state level. And so that is going to have a significant impact on people's ability to get the news. However, there are still lots of other voices out there. There's still lots of other news collection that is taking place. But I wanted to maybe ask you, Ben, to think about the groups that you have gone in to learn about. What is it that they had in common in terms of their outreach strategy, or was there a practice or an approach that applied to these groups that we can learn from? What were some of the best practices that you observed in some of the groups that you've connected with, either through Strong Towns or before that?
Well, first off, they all start with people who were motivated to seek change in their community. And, some of them found each other through Strong Towns, some of them through other means. But these are people who care about the places they live. And often that leads to, once you start to say, how do I make it better? Then you start to look at the problems. Then you start to look at the solutions. And so I think it's really, it's an iterative process in which you go from a small level and then you go to a big goal. And to me, what's been inspiring is how, we just started meeting over a beer. And I just recently did a story about a group in Sioux Falls. They started meeting over a beer. They got better and smarter and more cohesive. They applied for a grant, and now they have $100,000 to work with to try to change a very local neighborhood in a very local, granular way. And so it's, how you get from that conversation to the level of action. And then, at least from a newsworthy perspective, local groups seeking to improve their neighborhood with a grant, that's just newsworthy on its face. And so, how you get to that and one of the pieces of advice the source I interviewed for it said is, don't give up. There were plenty of times where we, thought we were whistling past the graveyard. And in point of fact, we were slowly building a snowball that got so big that now they're doing something they never envisioned when they started. And actually, let me also, to address the question of places that don't have enough journalism, you're really seeing nonprofits step into that role. For many of my stories, I've looked at things from the Sightline Institute, which covers housing policy, and they really bird dog a lot of legislation in state capitals. There are others that do this around transportation. And this is one of the things that I'm passionate about with Strong Towns. If people aren't going to be there to cover things, we are. And these are important stories. And I hope that we help get the snowball to grow. And I've been really inspired by many of the stories I've covered just for the level of commitment to people and really wanting to amplify their voices.
Maybe that's a quick question. How can someone who's listening to this pitch a story to you?
Send me an email, Ben@Strongtowns, and I'm interested in everything that's happening in communities large and small. And again, Strong Towns, we have so many areas of interest that, there's more that's resonant to us than you would find, for one that was sort of siloed around just one of our areas of interest. And even as I said, reach out for a conversation, even if you don't have a specific pitch. What are you doing? What are you struggling with? If there's anything I can help, again, just to help with the Strong Towns message becoming more effective, don't hesitate at all to reach out.
Yeah, that's well said. And I also dropped a link in the chat to a way that folks that are watching this can share stories. So as you come across something, it's in our action lab under writing for Strong Towns, but it doesn't only have to be by means of writing. It can be just sharing an article. Although I will say that we do get a fair amount that comes in, and Daniel, our chief editor, does sift through them and brings them to our internal pitch meeting, which really, I think, has really come into its own ever since Ben started, and Asha, our other staff writer, they're continuing to work with Sierra, another staff writer that we have at Strong Towns. And so internally within the Strong Towns organization, I mean, with a staff of 3, plus a handful of others that do write for us, we've been able to surface a bunch of new stories, kind of take, I think, do a great job of synthesizing a lot of the things that are happening. But again, a lot of it is dependent upon what's happening at the local level. And there's another way in which the fact that, for example, our local conversation group in Delta, we got news coverage because we sent press releases and other materials to the local paper. And finally, it was almost like the dam burst, and the local reporter said, "Hey, I'd like to write about you," because I had contacted his editor and the publisher to say, this is what our group is doing. And so then it was, all right, can you let's arrange an interview. And that has subsequently led to further opportunities. And so, sort of to your point, Ben, that when you trigger this process, it begins to sort of metastasize. Sounds like a bad word. It begins to spread, and you begin to gain new opportunities. And I think that touches on the next question that I want to put to you, which is, how does a Strong Towns advocate become sort of a trusted source or resource for local media to call upon? I always feel like, the president of the Chamber of Commerce is the person that the media, in our community will often just call up and ask for their quick, thoughts on an issue. But does it require that you be a leader of a group or an organization, or is there a way to become known as a neighborhood advocate, doing things on particular issues like this?
The first one is something I mentioned earlier: reach out to local journalists, have a cup of coffee with them, and let them see that you're knowledgeable and passionate. In the case of small town newspapers, a lot of them now barely have any writers, but often the editor or the publisher also, feels they have a civic role. And so maybe, reach out to the person who publishes your local weekly and just start to express this. And I also don't limit yourself in sharing this message to just journalists. I've actually reached out to city council members in my town to talk about the suburban Ponzi scheme, which we're doubling and tripling down on in a very destructive way. And just sort of, spread your expertise around with as many adjacent sources as you can, and word will get around. Maybe a reporter asks that city council member, who else should I talk to about that? And they'll say, I actually just spoke to a really interesting citizen advocate who's working on parking reform. You should talk to them. Another thing is if you have local blogs, local publications, local online sources, get your message out there. When a reporter starts to research a story, they'll look zoning reform in Brattleboro, and if you've just written a blog post about it, they might come to you. So think of the ways you can get even if you think it's small potatoes, even if you don't think you're going to get 5,000 readers, you might only get 50. They might be just the right ones. So get yourself out there.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think maybe this is a point where I can plug the fact that the Strong Towns local creator program is going to be hopefully starting fairly soon. The idea is that it'll be an analog to the local conversation program. So we're trying to find local groups that are meeting and support them, provide resources to them, at times help people to take the action themselves to get a group going. And the idea is if we can do something very similar with local creators, whether that's on TikTok or on YouTube or writing a blog or whatever that looks like, starting a podcast, but at the local level, to really replicate the idea that you can form a group is one great action. And we want to encourage a lot of people. I mean, we get thousands of requests now over the last, I think since the start of the year, we've had over 1,000 people select the button, find a local conversation near me. And when we sent out our survey to our Strong Towns audience, we had 1,300 responses, and of those, over 1,000 said that they were interested in finding a local conversation. So we know that there's that hunger for that local discussion. But one of the goals as well is to turn some of those individuals also into local voices in a way that is then speaking out into the broader community. And like Ben said, writing a blog about that. But if there's hurdles to doing that, if you feel intimidated by that prospect, that's going to be the goal of the local creator program, is to provide, in a sense, the resources, the how-to, as well as that more intangible sort of psychological coaching, which is like the strong assurance, like you really can do this and you can start to find your feet. That's how Strong Towns began, as a blog, just someone taking note of things happening in their local space and using that as an opportunity to then begin to speak into the conversation in a distinctive way. But that will be something that's hopefully launched around the time of the National Gathering or sometime later. But we're working on ways to scale that up in order to reach more people with a vision that they also can begin to not only meet in a local place, but also write about that local place or create content on video or whatever that looks like on there. I want to pivot to a question from Beth, who's on the call. I think Beth is in a vehicle right now, so I'll ask it in the way that I understood it. Oh, there's Beth. Perfect. Beth, you asked about marketing an event. Do you want to maybe ask the question?
Did I ask? I didn't know that I asked that. Okay. Marketing an event. I'm wearing two hats. When I was in the car, I was leaving a meeting that is not related to city planning, but related to zero waste, and we're having a big event. But I'm also a planning commissioner. So much of what we do overlaps like that. So right now, this week, we're actually having a city event. I'm not in charge of it, so I'm watching to see how they do their reach out. When on the city planning commission, I'm noticing that when the when the public involvement happens, it's really late in the process. And that's what I would like to encourage and work on, whatever outreach I am personally allowed to do, and then getting the city spokesperson to start doing it more. How do we get people involved early in the process so we don't end up having multiple public hearings because people all of a sudden are become aware and need to also say me too. So suggestions on that.
That's a really good question, and there are a couple of facets to it. One of them is that events may not be inherently newsworthy. And so your goal is to tie the event into a broader theme, into something that participants and people who read about it will know how to take action on. And I'll just give you one example. Whenever we see photos from local conversations, often it's just a group meeting at a brew pub. We cheer about them internally. We're really excited, but that's not going to be an event you can pitch to a local reporter. 10 of us are meeting at the coffee house. So what is it that your group is trying to work on? And then what event can you do that really illustrates that point and makes it resonant? And so one thing that stories I've really loved covering are ones on tactical urbanism, because they're really about people doing small scale things that really tangibly change a place. And that's a great story for everyone. There's a result at the end of it. People who see it are inspired to think, I can do these things. And so, what can your event be that is interesting and engaging and ties to a broader goal or message? And I point to the Strong Towns message of observe where people are struggling. So think about, if your issue is safe streets, call an event to a dangerous Strode where you see people interacting with traffic in a scary way. Get a local TV news crew there, and this woman with a stroller almost got killed here. Another one, we've been sending out people with radar guns for speed. Have a speeding event and watch how our main street is dangerous because everybody's speeding on it. And, ordinary citizens will come out to see this, local media outlets will see this. And then what can we do about this? And then your answer is, well, this is unsafe by design. Here are some things we're trying to affect in terms of changing policy. So my advice with the events is first, make them interesting, especially if TV news is included, make them visually compelling, but then make them tie into a message. This event is not an event in itself. This event is furthering this goal, which we hope leads to a policy change or a design change or something in the built environment.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful. Want to maybe move that then, Ben, to your thoughts in terms of, maybe this is more of a negative question, but what are the hallmarks of a poorly planned event from the perspective of an editor putting together assignments?
From my perspective, it was if you didn't do your homework, if you didn't anticipate the questions that I would ask, then I'm a little more distrustful that there's something newsworthy out of this. And so I'm looking for is the event well organized? Are the people you're making available to me to talk to knowledgeable about their issues? And I think that's more important than, I don't care if the venue, it doesn't look good. I don't care about any of that. I just care that the newsmakers I'm connecting with are passionate, are knowledgeable, and are connected to their local communities.
Mm-hmm. But so much, there's prep work to be done ahead of time. I know last Thursday, we hosted a housing policy walk just trying to name exactly what we were going to be doing. And we had a small turnout for it as our local conversation group. But the consequence of it, it just underscored there's enough event prep to do ahead of time that would have made the event more newsworthy if we could say we have a local counselor that's going to be part of the process, or we have, a local disability advocate, or we have someone in addition to sort of the regular crew that is coming along, or it's going to be with a group of high school students, or whatever that looks like. Do you have any thoughts on what it takes to reach a diverse audience? I think that's one of the challenges that we often see. And maybe from the news perspective, what is it that media organizations are doing well or maybe poorly to reach very diverse groups where they have a standard audience, sort of your Chamber of Commerce crowd, but how are they taking steps to improve their awareness of the needs in the community, and how can we kind of participate in that process effectively?
I think that's a great question. And first, to your earlier point about, making your event the best it can be, one of my pieces of advice, and this is actually in life as well as in media coverage, envision the best case scenario. Try to think, if this event goes perfectly, these things will happen. I'll get this coverage, I'll reach this influencer, I'll, grow support for my issue. And then sort of reverse engineer around that. What is it going to take you to get to that? And what are the pratfalls you might see related to that? And that relates to your question, your direct one. Who are the people in the community who are affected by this? And how do we best reach them? And in some cases, it might be alternative outlets. In some people, it might be, these are people not attuned to regular media sources. Maybe their local church is their source of information. Maybe they have a community organization where they're more likely to hear these things or about these things. And again, one of the things I think is so resonant about strong towns is we all have problems in our community, and many of them seem like they're invisible at the highest levels, but they're very real in people's lives. And so find the places where people are having those problems, engage with those people. And actually, Beth, this relates to your question of how do you get support in sooner so that when you get to the level of a meeting, you already have a groundswell of support or knowledge. And so to me, it's start as granular as you can, especially with communities that have not traditionally been covered well or even treated well by local governments. Get them where they are, amplify their messages where they are.
Mm-hmm. And I think that also has an impact on the way in which political campaigns are conducted. And maybe I'll pivot a little bit to that. We have Erin with us today, who's campaigning for mayor in her community. But I know that there's more and more folks that kind of are acknowledging that it is their responsibility, or they feel a compulsion to step up within a local context, either be put on a planning commission or to run for an elected office. And what are the things that help local candidates to break through the noise or break through, again, the incumbency bias that often sort of sits certain people in certain seats and they never seem to budge? Do you have any suggestions on media savvy ways to engage within the community?
I think in so many ways, public policy is a black box for people. And, government is something that just happens to them. And so I think as a candidate, the more you can do to connect the local ways people are struggling, the things that people say, I wish this were better, but I don't see how to make it that way. If you can connect that to your campaign, and not in the way of, I'm the hero who can fix this, but I can validate the struggles that you're experiencing and talk about how they relate to some of the institutional issues, which is why I'm running to try to fix the institutional issues. Mm-hmm. I think if you do that, you can bring people on board who might be, apathetic to politics and to local government. And I think that there are so many ways. We talk about the unsafe built environment. We talk about lack of affordable housing. So many of these actually have a public policy aspect to them that, the more you can connect to, actually your streets could be safer. It's because traffic engineers prioritize vehicle throughput to every other user. And how do we rally every other user to try to affect that change? I think there are a lot of opportunities there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that really speaks to an anecdote I've shared a few times, but I gave a copy of Chuck's book, Strong Towns, to a local city councilor, and he had just not too long before that been elected and was a young councilor, very, very keen, very bright. And as he worked through the book, he said he read it quite quickly, and it really touched on a whole bunch of new questions that made budget time a lot more difficult for him, because he was asking these questions and the budget staff were not prepared for the types of questions that he was asking about, productivity of the land base and all of these like core insights that relate to whether or not the city is actually financially solvent or not. And he said, yeah, it made budget time a lot more difficult. And I think that actually speaks to one of the ways that Strong Towns offers a bit of a toolbox of really unique tools that are distinct from sort of the standard Chamber of Commerce. I'm here to make your taxes go down, your services go up, and everybody happy. And the Strong Towns advocate comes along and says, no, we're here to build, we're in an infinite game. We need to conserve resources in a really effective way. We need to make, great investments in the low hanging fruit. That there's kind of a new strategy where all of a sudden they're talking about bike lanes as investments and as, just these core ways to use public funds, rather than, I want to have a bike lane because I love it, or because I, feel better when I walk down it and hear the birds sing, and kind of that bringing together of all of the different elements of what it takes to make a community stronger so that it can truly prosper. And I think we're coming up at the top of the hour here, but I just wanted to close with a question for you, which is, what does it take for a place to be a strong town with a strong local media presence? Is there any way that we can help to foster that? I know the general event title for office hours today was how to make your events newsworthy, but maybe let's actually put it this question: how do you make your community newsworthy? As a closing thought.
For our national gathering, they asked us all to sit in front of a camera and answer a question: what makes a strong town? And my answer was, a strong town was not a perfect place. It was a place where people have identified their problems and they're trying to solve them across various constituencies. And so to me, the fact that first, you're local and local publications cover localities, that you identify problems and areas where people are struggling, and where people are struggling is inherently newsworthy, and then that you're banding together to try to save them. It's inspiring on its face. And for me, in the stories I've written for Strong Towns, I've been inspired by the people that I've interviewed who have done those things. And so I think you have multiple. We have a real problem. We can point to a solution. There are a lot of us who really care about this. I think that makes a compelling case for coverage. And again, from the journalist perspective, that makes for a really rewarding story, especially where, I talk about tactical urbanism, just because it's such a discrete visual reminder of making a place better. This street was dangerous and now it's less dangerous. And that plants the seed again of Chuck's message: do the smallest thing you can do it again, do it ad infinitum. And the more you can point to, success doesn't have to come from $1 million grant from the governor. It can come from a bucket of paint and some Jersey barriers. And the more you can convey the message that can lead to success, the more you can build the snowball.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that, as that work of beginning a process and having confidence that as you persist in it, as you know, as Chuck has said before in words that have really inspired me, if you love your place, it will love you back. And I just find that to be such a powerful and compelling way of understanding what we need within our community. I've basically that was the core batch of questions that I wanted to run by you, Ben. I do want to offer a programming note, and then we can just open up the microphones and chat further. But we will not have office hours next week. Just for everyone that's attending, we won't have office hours next week because all of our team members are going to be at the national gathering in Charlotte, which is starting next Tuesday night and then into Wednesday. Following that, Rachel Quednow will be our presenter on this, I believe it's the 7th of June. Let me make sure I have that right. Yes, the 7th of June is Rachel Quednow, then Daniel Harrigus, I think on a housing related topic, although I did say I've asked him several times to talk on housing. And so I said, if you want a break, we can have you talk about something different, but I will get confirmation of what the topic is for that. The 21st of June will be a special edition for the Strong Towns member drive, and that will be with John Pattison. And then at the end of the month, and that will be the final office hours for this first season, that will be with Chuck Marone. And so that's coming up for June 7th, Rachel, June 14th, Daniel Harrigus, June 21st, John Pattison, and June 28th, Chuck Marone. Oh, and I'll here drop the links in the chat as well. But I wanted to close then. Thank you, Ben, so much for bringing us a whole host of different insights to take note of and apply within our place as well. Thank you so much to everyone also that has joined for Strong Towns office hours. Grateful for this opportunity to spend time together.